German Shepherd was lying beside a toy train track alone. What baby did next left? Everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen will leave you speechless. A moment of pure innocence that changed everything. When little Liam found something unexpected by those abandoned tracks, nobody could have predicted what would happen next. The rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, creating a rhythmic backdrop to an otherwise quiet morning in the small town of Pine Haven. 5-year-old Liam sat cross-legged on the living room floor, his collection of miniature cars scattered around him like fallen leaves. His mother, Sarah, moved about the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee and toast filling the air as she prepared breakfast. Outside, the skies had darkened to a deep gray, promising more rain throughout the day. "Mommy," Liam suddenly said, his head tilting slightly. His hands stopped moving, a tiny red fire truck frozen mid-journey. "Someone's crying." Sarah glanced up from the counter where she was spreading jam on toast. "What was that, sweetie?" "I hear someone crying," Liam repeated, his voice soft but certain. His eyes were not focused on his toys anymore, but seemed to look through the walls of their home, towards something distant. Sarah smiled gently. "It's just the rain, honey. Sometimes it sounds like someone's sad, doesn't it?" But Liam shook his head firmly, his brown curls bouncing with conviction. "No, he's crying. He's beside the train track. He's waiting." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the morning's dampness. Something about the way Liam said it, not as imagination or play, but with absolute certainty, made her pause. Her husband Mark appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from the shower, catching the end of the conversation. "Who's waiting by what train track, buddy?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes meeting Sarah's with a question. "The hurt one. He's guarding something important," Liam said, turning back to his toys as if he'd simply commented on the weather. "He's been there all night in the rain." Mark raised an eyebrow at Sarah. "That imagination gets bigger every day." Sarah nodded, but couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. Liam had always been sensitive, noticing things others missed, forming connections with stray cats and injured birds. But this felt different. His words hung in the air like the static before a storm. "Liam, honey, there aren't any train tracks nearby except for the old miniature train display at Riverside Park," Sarah said carefully. The park had been built on the grounds of an abandoned railway station. Years ago, the town had installed a charming toy train exhibit for children, with miniature buildings and tiny plastic people frozen in everyday scenes. "That's where he is," Liam said without looking up. "And he's not alone." Mark chuckled, breaking the tension. "Well, tell your imaginary friend breakfast is ready. Those pancakes won't eat themselves." But as they ate breakfast, Liam kept glancing toward the window, his small fingers tapping against the table, as if counting down to something only he knew was coming. When Sarah asked if he wanted to help bake cookies later, he nodded absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Can we go to the park today?" he asked suddenly. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances. "It's raining pretty hard, buddy," Mark said, gesturing toward the window where fat raindrops were now splattering against the glass. "But he's waiting," Liam insisted, his voice rising slightly. "He needs help." "Who needs help, Liam?" Sarah asked, setting down her coffee mug. "The dog by the train tracks," Liam said as if it were obvious. "He's guarding something special, but he's hungry and sad. His person is gone." Sarah felt that chill again. They didn't have pets, had never had a dog. Where was this coming from? "Liam, is this from a show you watched, or a story at school?" Mark asked, his forehead creasing slightly. Liam sighed with the exasperation only a child could muster when adults were being particularly dense. "No, Daddy. I just know. He's there right now, and we need to help him." The conversation shifted to other topics as breakfast continued, but Liam remained distracted, his eyes drifting to the window every few minutes. When breakfast was over, he didn't run to play with his toys as usual, but sat by the window in the living room, watching the rain with unusual stillness for such a young child. Sarah busied herself with household chores, but she couldn't stop thinking about Liam's strange insistence. He wasn't typically prone to elaborate make-believe. When the phone rang, she answered to find it was her sister wanting to chat about weekend plans. She moved to the kitchen, her voice lowered to avoid disturbing Mark, who had settled in the home office to catch up on work. When she returned to the living room 15 minutes later, her heart nearly stopped. Liam was gone. His raincoat and boots were missing from the hook by the door. "Mark!" she called, panic rising in her throat. "Mark! Liam's gone!" Mark rushed into the room, face pale. What do you mean, gone? His raincoat and boots. Sarah pointed to the empty hooks. The door, it's unlocked. Without another word, they grabbed their jackets and ran outside into the pouring rain. The neighborhood was quiet, streets glistening with water and empty of people seeking shelter from the downpour. Liam! Sarah called, her voice nearly drowned by the sound of rain hammering against rooftops and pavement. Liam, where are you? He must have gone to the park, Mark said, already moving toward their car, the train display. Sarah nodded, heart pounding as they drove the short distance to Riverside Park. The wipers worked frantically against the deluge, barely keeping the windshield clear enough to see. Mark's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. I should have been watching him more closely, Sarah whispered, scanning the rain-blurred landscape for any sign of her son. We'll find him, Mark assured her, but his voice was tight with worry. The park was deserted, playground equipment slick with rain, the swing seats collecting puddles. They parked haphazardly and ran toward the miniature train display that sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. It was an odd attraction, part nostalgic nod to the town's railway past, part playground curiosity. The detailed model trains would run on weekends and holidays, chugging along tracks that wound through miniature towns and past tiny plastic people. Liam! Sarah shouted, her hair plastered to her face within seconds of leaving the car. Liam, answer me right now! The rain seemed to swallow her words. Then Mark grabbed her arm, pointing. There, by the old depot model. A small figure in a bright yellow raincoat stood motionless at the edge of the display. Sarah's relief was instant but short-lived as she noticed what Liam was staring at. A large dog, a German shepherd, soaked to the skin, lay beside the miniature train tracks. The animal was massive, its fur darkened by rain, body completely still, except for the shallow rise and fall of its ribcage. It didn't react to their approach, didn't even lift its head, but its eyes tracked them. Intelligent, wary eyes that seemed to hold a world of sorrow. Liam, step back from the dog, Mark called, slowing his pace. It might be dangerous. But Liam shook his head, not moving from his spot. He's not dangerous. He's Max. He's protecting something. Sarah noticed that the dog wasn't chained or tied, yet it hadn't moved from its position even as Liam stood barely 3 feet away. The animal looked exhausted, its body tense despite its apparent weakness. How did you know he was here? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. Liam shrugged, his eyes never leaving the dog. I told you. I heard him crying. Mark carefully moved closer, scanning the area for any sign of an owner. The park was completely empty, the tree line dark and uninviting in the dismal weather. He looks like he's been here a while, Mark observed, noting the mud caked on the animal's legs and belly. Maybe he's lost. The dog's eyes shifted between them, alert despite its obvious fatigue. Its ears twitched at their voices, but still, it didn't move from its spot beside the miniature track. He's not lost, Liam said with that same unsettling certainty. He's waiting. His person told him to stay, so he's staying. Baby, how could you possibly know that? Sarah asked, genuinely perplexed. Liam didn't answer. Instead, he slowly reached into his raincoat pocket and pulled out half a sandwich wrapped in plastic. Part of the lunch Sarah had packed him the day before. With infinite care, he unwrapped it and extended his small hand toward the dog. Liam, no! Mark moved forward, but stopped when the dog's eyes flicked to him. A low rumble, not quite a growl, emanating from its throat. It's okay, Liam said, speaking to both his father and the dog. He's just scared. The dog's gaze returned to Liam, and something shifted in its posture. The rumble stopped. Slowly, painfully, the German shepherd lifted its head. Its nose twitched at the scent of food, but still, it didn't leave its position by the tracks. He won't leave his spot, Liam explained, placing the sandwich on the ground and pushing it forward with his boot. That's why he's so hungry. He was told to stay. The dog looked at the sandwich, then back at Liam. In its eyes was such profound sadness that Sarah felt her own eyes welling with tears. What had happened to this animal to put such grief in its eyes? Who told him to stay, Liam? Mark asked quietly, as if careful not to break the strange connection between his son and the dog. His soldier, Liam replied simply, but his soldier isn't coming back. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances, both wondering how their son could have invented such a specific backstory, or worse, if he was somehow right. The dog finally stretched forward, its movement stiff and pained, and took the sandwich delicately from where Liam had placed it. It ate quickly but neatly, then returned to its exact position, eyes once again alert and watching. "Good boy," Liam whispered. "You did a good job waiting." The dog's tail moved, just once, a brief thump against the wet ground. "We should call animal control," Mark said quietly to Sarah. "It needs medical attention." Sarah nodded, but her eyes were fixed on her son. Something about this moment felt pivotal, as if they were standing at the edge of a story much larger than a lost dog in the rain. "Can we bring him home?" Liam asked, turning to his parents with pleading eyes. "He's so cold and wet." "Honey, we don't know if he belongs to someone," Sarah began, though the dog's condition suggested otherwise. "And he might be dangerous." "He's not," Liam insisted. "He's a hero. He just needs someone to save him now." As if responding to Liam's words, the dog's ears perked up suddenly. Its head swiveled toward the park entrance, body tensing. A low, warning growl rumbled from its chest. Sarah turned to see what had triggered the dog's response. Through the curtain of rain, headlights appeared at the park entrance. A black SUV moved slowly along the access road, stopping near their car. "Finally, maybe that's the owner," Mark said, relief evident in his voice. But the dog was now fully alert, its posture no longer that of an exhausted stray, but of a trained guardian. It rose shakily to its feet, placing itself between Liam and the approaching vehicle. "I don't think so," Sarah murmured, instinctively moving closer to Liam. "Look at the dog's reaction." The doors of the SUV opened, and two men stepped out. They wore dark raincoats, their movements purposeful as they scanned the park. They didn't call out for a missing pet or show any signs of relief at finding the dog. Instead, they moved with the precision of people searching for something specific. "We should go," Mark said quietly, reaching for Liam's hand. "Now." But Liam stood his ground, his small hand now resting on the German Shepherd's wet fur. "They're not his friends," he said. "They're looking for what he's guarding." The dog's growl deepened as the men approached, catching sight of them by the train display. One of the men pointed, saying something to his companion that was lost in the rain. They changed direction, heading straight for them. "Folks," one called out, his voice professional but carrying an edge that raised the hairs on Sarah's neck. "Glad we found you. Animal control sent us about that stray. Dangerous animal, been causing problems." The German Shepherd's growl became more pronounced, its body now fully shielding Liam, despite its weakened state. Sarah felt Mark's hand on her arm, gentle but urgent. Something was wrong. No animal control officer she'd ever seen drove an unmarked black SUV or approached with such calculated casualness. "Funny," Mark replied, his voice steady despite the tension Sarah could feel radiating from him. "We were just about to call animal control ourselves." The men were closer now, and Sarah could see their faces properly. They weren't smiling, and their eyes kept darting to the spot where the dog had been lying. One of them had a hand inside his coat in a way that seemed anything but casual. "That dog is part of an investigation," the second man said, dropping all pretense. "Step away from it." The German Shepherd's growl became a series of sharp, warning barks. Despite its obvious weakness, there was a power in its stance that left no doubt about its training. What kind of investigation requires two plainclothes officers to track down a stray dog in the rain? Mark asked, subtly moving to stand between the men and his family. The first man's face hardened. "That's classified information, sir. Now step aside." Then his gaze dropped to the ground where the dog had been lying, and his eyes narrowed. "Check the dog," he barked to his partner. "He's got it." The German Shepherd lunged forward, its bark now ferocious despite its weakened state. The sudden movement startled everyone, except Liam, who seemed to have been expecting it. "Run!" Liam shouted, tugging at his mother's hand. "Max says run now!" In the confusion that followed, Sarah would never be quite sure how they decided to listen to their 5-year-old son. Perhaps it was maternal instinct, or perhaps it was the absolute conviction in Liam's voice. But as the men began to move forward with purpose, Mark grabbed Liam, and they ran, not toward their car, which was blocked by the SUV, but toward a narrow path that led through the trees at the edge of the park. The most surprising thing wasn't their flight. It was that the German Shepherd, whom Liam had called Max, immediately followed them, running alongside the boy as if they'd been companions for years. Behind them, angry shouts cut through the rain. Sarah looked over her shoulder to see the men in pursuit, no longer maintaining any facade of officialdom. "Who are those men?" she gasped as they ran. "Bad men," Liam answered simply. Max was supposed to stop them. The dog stayed close to Liam's side, its movements gaining strength with each stride despite its obvious malnourishment. Whatever had kept it by those miniature tracks for days, it had now found a new purpose, protecting the child who had shown it kindness. They ran through the rain, away from the park, and into the unknown, the sound of pursuit fading behind them as they ducked through a gap in the fence that led to an alley behind the park. The German shepherd, Max, never left Liam's side. A guardian materialized from a child's inexplicable certainty, and a rainy morning that had started so normally. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who were those men? What did they want? And how had Liam known about the dog in the first place? But there was no time for questions now. There was only the rain, their ragged breathing, and the steady presence of the German shepherd, who had, in the space of minutes, transformed from a pitiful stray to their unexpected protector. The alley behind the park was narrow and cluttered with garbage bins and overgrown weeds. They huddled against a brick wall, breathing hard, listening for sounds of pursuit. The rain had intensified, creating a curtain of white noise that made it difficult to hear anything beyond their immediate vicinity. "Are they following us?" Mark whispered, peering around the corner of the building. Sarah held Liam close, feeling his small body trembling. Whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. The German shepherd sat pressed against Liam's side, its ears rotating like radar dishes, constantly scanning for threats. "I don't see them," Mark reported, but his voice carried no relief. "We need to get somewhere safe. Call the police." "And tell them what?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. "That 2 men in a black SUV were chasing us because of a stray dog? They'll think we're crazy." Liam looked up at her with those serious brown eyes. "They weren't police, Mommy. Max knows bad men when he sees them." As if responding to his name, the dog nudged Liam's hand with his nose, a gesture so gentle it brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. This animal, whatever its story, had clearly bonded with her son in a way that defied explanation. "We need to figure out what's really going on," Mark said, pulling out his phone. "Maybe we can—" "No," Liam said suddenly, his voice sharp with urgency. "Don't call anyone. Not yet." "Why not, honey?" Sarah asked. Liam's eyes were fixed on the dog, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. "Max says they have friends everywhere. People who look like good guys but aren't." Mark ran his hands through his wet hair. "This is insane. We're taking advice from a 5-year-old who thinks he can talk to dogs." "I don't talk to him," Liam corrected seriously. "I just know what he's thinking. He's scared too, but he's trying to protect us." The dog's head lifted suddenly, ears perked. A low whine escaped its throat, and its body tensed. "Someone's coming," Sarah whispered, instinctively pressing herself and Liam further into the shadows. Footsteps splashed through puddles at the mouth of the alley, multiple sets, moving slowly, deliberately. The German shepherd rose to its feet, positioning itself between the family and the approaching sound. "Check every alley," a voice called out, carrying clearly through the rain. "They can't have gone far." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. These weren't giving up. Whatever they wanted, it was important enough to search for them in this weather. Liam tugged at her sleeve. "There's another way," he whispered. "Max knows a place." Before she could ask what he meant, the dog was moving, padding silently toward the back of the alley, where a chain-link fence separated the narrow space from what looked like an abandoned lot. The German shepherd nosed at a section of the fence where the metal had been bent, creating a gap just large enough for them to squeeze through. The footsteps were getting closer. "Trust him," Liam whispered, already moving toward the gap in the fence. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand. "We don't have a choice." They squeezed through the opening, the dog following last, its movements surprisingly graceful, despite its size and apparent weakness. On the other side was indeed an abandoned lot, but beyond it stood a building Sarah recognized, the old Riverside Railway Station, boarded up for years but still structurally sound. The German shepherd led them across the muddy lot, staying low and moving with purpose. As they approached the building, Sarah could see that one of the rear doors had been propped open. Not broken, but deliberately left accessible. "Someone's been here," Mark observed, noting the relatively clear path to the door. The dog paused at the entrance, head tilted as if listening. Then it gave a soft, almost conversational bark, nothing like the aggressive warning sounds from earlier. "He's calling someone," Liam explained, as if this were perfectly normal. From inside the building came an answering sound, not a bark, but a low whistle, human but somehow in harmony with the dog's communication. The German Shepherd's tail wagged once, briefly, and it trotted into the building. Liam followed without hesitation, leaving Sarah and Mark with little choice but to follow their son into the unknown. The interior of the old station was dimly lit, but surprisingly dry and clean. Someone had been maintaining it, keeping the worst of the decay at bay. Lanterns hung from hooks along the walls, casting warm pools of light that revealed restored benches and even some old railway posters that had been carefully preserved. "Welcome," a voice said from the shadows near what had once been the ticket counter. A man stepped into the light, elderly, with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a worn but clean flannel shirt and jeans. He moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to live simply, but there was strength in his bearing that suggested he was far from helpless. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his gaze moving from them to the German Shepherd. "Max finally brought you." "You know this dog?" Sarah asked, still holding Liam protectively close. The man nodded, a sad smile crossing his weathered features. "I should. He saved my life once." He gestured to the benches. "Please, sit. You look like you've had quite a morning." Mark remained standing, his posture tense. "Who are you, and how did you know we were coming?" "My name is Walter," the man replied, "and I've been watching that poor dog keep vigil by those tracks for 3 days now, waiting for someone to help him. When I saw you with him this morning, I knew his wait was over." 3 days? Sarah echoed. "He's been out there for 3 days? Walter nodded gravely. "In the rain, in the cold, barely eating. He wouldn't leave that spot, no matter what I did to try to coax him away." "Why?" Mark asked. "What's so special about that location?" Walter looked at the German Shepherd, who had settled next to Liam and was now resting his head on the boy's lap. "That dog isn't just any stray. He's a military working dog, trained for special operations, and he's been guarding something that very dangerous people want to get their hands on." Sarah felt the pieces of the morning's chaos beginning to form a pattern. The men who were chasing us, they knew about the dog. "They've been looking for him for weeks," Walter confirmed, "ever since his handler disappeared." "Disappeared?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Walter's expression grew even more somber. "Staff Sergeant Danny Morrison. Good man. He was working on something big, something that could put a lot of powerful people in prison. But before he could finish his mission, he vanished. No body, no evidence, just gone." Liam looked up from petting the dog. Max was supposed to wait for him. Danny told him to stay and guard the secret. Walter's eyes widened slightly. That's exactly right. How did you know that?" "Liam has a gift," Sarah said, still trying to process everything. "He knew about the dog before we ever saw him." "The boy has the sight," Walter said with something like reverence. "Some children do, before the world teaches them to stop believing in impossible things." Mark was pacing now, his lawyer's mind working through the implications. "So, this dog has been guarding something for his missing handler, something important enough that people are willing to hunt him down in broad daylight." "Not just people," Walter corrected. "These are professionals, military contractors, possibly rogue intelligence operatives. They're not going to give up just because you got away once." "Then what do we do?" Sarah asked, fear making her voice shake. Walter walked to a cabinet that stood against one wall and retrieved a small, weathered metal box. "First, we need to understand what we're dealing with." He set the box on the bench beside Liam. The German Shepherd immediately focused on it, his body language shifting to one of intense attention. "Max had this with him when he came to the tracks," Walter explained, "buried under the miniature train display, hidden so well that even I almost missed it." Liam reached out to touch the box, and the dog whined softly, not in warning, but in what sounded like relief. "It's okay, boy," Liam whispered. "We're going to help." Sarah noticed that the box was military issue, olive drab with reinforced corners and a complex locking mechanism. But what drew her attention was the small laminated photograph taped to the lid. It showed a young soldier in dress uniform standing next to a German Shepherd that was unmistakably Max. "That's Danny," Walter said, following her gaze. "And that's Max when he was younger. They were partners for 4 years." "What's in the box?" Mark asked. Walter's expression grew grave. "Evidence, recordings, documents, photographs, proof of a conspiracy that goes higher than you might imagine." The sound of vehicles outside made them all freeze. Through the boarded windows, they could see the sweep of headlights, moving slowly but systematically. "They found us," Mark whispered. The German Shepherd was on his feet instantly, body tense and ready. But instead of the aggressive posture from earlier, he moved to the box and nosed it toward Liam. "He wants you to take it," Walter said urgently. "The evidence needs to be protected." "We can't," Sarah protested. "We don't know anything about military conspiracies or—" "You don't have a choice," Walter interrupted. "Those men will kill to get this back, but they won't expect a family with a 5-year-old to be involved. You might be the only ones who can get it to safety." Liam picked up the box, his small hands barely able to hold it properly. Max says his friend Danny hid this for a reason. He was trying to save other soldiers. The lights outside were getting closer. Walter moved to a window and peered through a gap in the boards. "3 vehicles," he reported. "They're surrounding the building." Sarah's mind raced. "How do we get out of here?" Walter smiled grimly. "This place has been a hideout for more than just me. There are tunnels beneath the station, part of the original railway infrastructure. They connect to several buildings in town." He led them to what appeared to be a maintenance closet, but when he pulled aside a false back panel, it revealed a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Where does it go?" Mark asked. "Several places," Walter replied, "but the closest exit is near the library, about 6 blocks from here." The sound of boots on gravel outside made the decision for them. The German Shepherd was already moving toward the hidden passage, and Liam followed without hesitation, still clutching the metal box. "Wait," Sarah called to Walter. "Aren't you coming with us?" The old man shook his head. "Someone needs to slow them down, give you a head start." "You can't stay here," Mark protested. "I've been in tighter spots than this," Walter assured him, "and someone needs to make sure Max's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Liam turned back, his eyes wide with sudden understanding. "Max's friend Danny isn't coming back, is he?" Walter knelt down to the boy's level. "No, son. Danny's gone, but he left Max to protect something important. And now, Max is protecting you." The dog whined softly, as if understanding the conversation. He nuzzled Walter's hand, then returned to Liam's side. "Go," Walter urged them. "And remember, trust no one in uniform until you are absolutely certain they're on the right side." The sound of splintering wood came from the front of the building. They were out of time. Sarah grabbed Liam's free hand, and they plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. Mark followed, and the German Shepherd brought up the rear, moving with renewed purpose despite his obvious exhaustion. Behind them, they heard Walter's voice, raised in greeting to their pursuers. "Gentlemen, bit late for a social call, isn't it?" The tunnel was narrow but well-maintained, with emergency lighting that flickered on as they moved deeper underground. The air was cool and damp, but not stale, evidence that the ventilation system was still functional. "How did Walter know about this place?" Mark asked as they hurried along. "He's been here a long time," Liam replied matter-of-factly. "He was a soldier too, before. He knows how to hide." Sarah didn't ask how Liam knew that. She was beginning to accept that her son's connection to this situation went beyond normal understanding. The tunnel stretched ahead of them, lit by occasional bulbs that cast eerie shadows on the concrete walls. Behind them, the sounds of their pursuers grew fainter, but Sarah knew they wouldn't give up easily. "What are we going to do with this?" she asked, gesturing to the box in Liam's hands. "We're going to help Max keep his promise," Liam said with the simple certainty that had started their entire ordeal. "Danny trusted him to keep it safe. Now Max trusts us." The German Shepherd looked back at the boy, and in that moment, Sarah saw something that made her heart catch. The dog's eyes held not just intelligence, but gratitude, and perhaps, for the first time in days, hope. They emerged from the tunnel through a hidden entrance in the basement of the town library, startling the elderly librarian who was reorganizing returned books despite the early hour. "Mrs. Chen," Mark said, recognizing her, "we need help." The librarian looked at their bedraggled appearance, the exhausted dog, and the military box in Liam's hands. Without asking a single question, she moved to the basement door and locked it behind them. "What kind of help?" she asked simply. "The kind that might get you in trouble," Sarah admitted. Mrs. Chen smiled, an expression that held more steel than her gentle appearance suggested. "Young man," she said to Liam, "I've been in trouble before. Sometimes it's the only way to do what's right." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean and providing cover for their escape. But Sarah knew this was far from over. They had the box, they had the dog, and they had more questions than answers. Most importantly, they had a 5-year-old boy who seemed to understand more about their situation than any adult in their lives. The real test was just beginning. Mrs. Chen led them through the library's back corridors, past rooms filled with archived newspapers and donated books waiting to be sorted. The German Shepherd stayed close to Liam, his exhaustion becoming more apparent now that the immediate danger had passed. "There's a small apartment above the library," Mrs. Chen explained, as they climbed a narrow staircase. "I use it sometimes when I work late on inventory. You should be safe there for a while." The apartment was modest but comfortable, with a kitchenette, a small living area, and a bedroom with twin beds. Mrs. Chen immediately went to the kitchen and began preparing hot tea and sandwiches, her movements efficient and purposeful. "You've done this before," Mark observed, watching her work. Mrs. Chen paused, a slight smile playing at her lips. "My late husband was a journalist in Hong Kong before we immigrated. Sometimes people needed a safe place to stay while their stories were being told." She glanced at the military box, which Liam had placed carefully on the coffee table. "I recognized the look of people carrying dangerous truths." Sarah settled onto the couch, pulling Liam close. The boy was still clutching one of Max's ears, and the dog had positioned himself so that Liam could lean against his side. Despite everything they had been through, both child and animal seemed calmer now. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," Mark said, gesturing toward the box, "before we decide what to do next." Mrs. Chen brought over a tray of tea and food. "Sometimes understanding comes with a price. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah looked at her son, who was now feeding pieces of sandwich to Max with careful attention to the dog's gentle manners. "I think we're already past the point of no return." Liam looked up at his mother. "Max says the box has pictures and sounds that show bad men doing bad things to good soldiers." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. "The child understands what's in there?" "Liam has been understanding things all morning that he shouldn't be able to," Sarah admitted. "It's like he and Max are connected somehow." Mark examined the box more closely. The lock was sophisticated, not something that could be opened with simple tools. "This is military-grade security. We'd need the combination or—" 7729, Liam said without looking up from feeding Max. Everyone stared at him. "What did you say?" Mark asked. 7729, Liam repeated. "That's Danny's special numbers." Mark exchanged glances with Sarah, then carefully entered the combination. The lock clicked open with a soft sound that made Max's ears perk up. Inside the box, wrapped in waterproof material, were several items: a digital recorder, a USB drive, photographs, and a handwritten journal. There was also a letter in a sealed envelope marked, "If something happens to me." Danny knew he was in danger, Mrs. Chen observed quietly. Mark opened the letter first, reading silently before his face grew pale. This is bigger than we thought." "What does it say?" Sarah asked. Mark cleared his throat and began to read. "If you're reading this, it means they got to me before I could expose them. The evidence in this box documents a conspiracy involving military contractors, defense officials, and private security companies. They've been running illegal operations using military working dogs as test subjects for experimental drugs and training techniques." Max whined softly, pressing closer to Liam. "Dogs like Max were being tortured in the name of creating super soldiers," Mark continued. "Many died. Those that survived, like Max, were trained not just for combat but as living weapons. When some of us tried to report it, we started disappearing." Mrs. Chen sat down heavily. "How many people knew about this?" Mark scanned the letter. "According to this, at least dozen soldiers tried to blow the whistle. All of them either transferred to dangerous assignments or simply vanished." Sarah felt sick. "And Max was one of the test subjects?" Liam nodded sadly. "They hurt him, made him do things he didn't want to do. But Danny saved him." "Danny was Max's original handler," Mark read further. "He helped Max escape during a raid that was meant to eliminate the evidence. Danny managed to gather proof of everything before they caught up with him." The digital recorder was small but professional grade. Mark hesitated before pressing play, unsure what they might hear. "Play it," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "If people died to protect this information, we owe it to them to listen." The recording began with static, then a young man's voice, speaking quickly and quietly. "This is Staff Sergeant Daniel Morrison, recording testimony on unauthorized experiments conducted on military working dogs at classified locations. Date is March 15th. Danny's voice was steady but tense as he described what he'd witnessed. Dogs subjected to experimental drugs that enhanced their aggression and pain tolerance, training methods that bordered on torture, and handlers who refused to participate being threatened or transferred. The worst part, Danny's voice continued, is that they're planning to expand the program. Not just dogs anymore, but human soldiers. They want to create an army that feels no pain, shows no mercy, and follows orders without question. Max had grown increasingly agitated as the recording played, pressing himself against Liam as if seeking comfort. "It's okay, boy," Liam whispered. "Danny was trying to save you. He was brave." The recording continued with Danny describing specific incidents, naming dates, locations, and people involved. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, involving high-ranking military officials and civilian contractors worth millions of dollars. "I've gathered evidence of everything," Danny's voice said near the end of the recording. "Financial records, video footage, witness statements. If something happens to me, this evidence needs to reach Senator Patricia Williams on the Armed Services Committee. She's the only one I trust to handle this properly." The recording ended with Danny's final words. "Max, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. You're a good boy. You did nothing wrong. Find someone who can help finish what we started." The room fell silent, except for the gentle sound of rain against the windows. Liam was now hugging Max, both of them seeming to understand more than anyone else what the recording meant. "Senator Williams," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully, "she's been in the news lately, pushing for military accountability reforms." "But how do we get this to her?" Sarah asked. "Those men aren't going to just give up. They're probably watching her too." Mark was examining the photographs that had been in the box. His face grew increasingly grim as he looked through them. These show the facilities where the experiments took place, and some of the people involved. He held up one photo that showed a man in military uniform standing next to cages containing dogs. "This man, I've seen him before." "Where?" Sarah asked. "On the news. General Harrison Beck. He's being considered for promotion to head of Special Operations Command." Mrs. Chen took the photo, studying it carefully. "If a man like that is involved, no wonder they're willing to kill to keep this secret." Liam looked up from comforting Max. "The bad men who chased us, they work for him." "How do you know that?" Mark asked. "Max remembers their smell," Liam explained simply. "They came to the place where Danny worked. They took Danny away, but Max escaped with the box." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with their wet clothes. "So, Max has been carrying this evidence around for weeks, staying by those train tracks because that's where Danny told him to wait." "And now they're getting desperate," Mrs. Chen observed. "The longer Max stays missing with that evidence, the more time there is for someone to find it." Mark began pacing, his legal mind working through their options. "We need to get this to Senator Williams, but we can't just walk into her office. And we can't trust normal channels. Too many people might be compromised." "What about the media?" Sarah suggested. "Investigative journalists?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Danny tried that route first, according to his letter. 3 journalists who were investigating related stories have had their careers destroyed or worse." Max suddenly lifted his head, ears alert. He rose and moved to the window, looking down at the street below. "What is it, boy?" Liam asked, following the dog. Liam peered through the curtains, then quickly stepped back. "The black cars are back. They found us." Mrs. Chen moved to another window. 3 vehicles, positioned at different points around the library. They're not taking any chances this time." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with their wet clothes. "So, Max has been carrying this evidence around for weeks, staying by those train tracks because that's where Danny told him to wait." "And now they're getting desperate," Mrs. Chen observed. "The longer Max stays missing with that evidence, the more time there is for someone to find it." Mark began pacing, his legal mind working through their options. "We need to get this to Senator Williams, but we can't just walk into her office. And we can't trust normal channels. Too many people might be compromised." "What about the media?" Sarah suggested. "Investigative journalists?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Danny tried that route first, according to his letter. 3 journalists who were investigating related stories have had their careers destroyed or worse." Max suddenly lifted his head, ears alert. He rose and moved to the window, looking down at the street below. "What is it, boy?" Liam asked, following the dog. Liam peered through the curtains, then quickly stepped back. "The black cars are back. They found us." Mrs. Chen moved to another window. 3 vehicles positioned at different points around the library. They're not taking any chances this time. Sarah's heart sank. How did they track us so quickly? Doesn't matter now, Mark said, already gathering the evidence back into the box. We need another way out. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she moved to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. From it, she retrieved what looked like a complex radio setup. My husband's old equipment, she explained, powering it on. He taught me how to use it for emergencies. Who are you calling? Mark asked. Mrs. Chen smiled mysteriously. Sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. She began adjusting dials and speaking into the microphone in rapid Cantonese. After a few minutes of conversation, she turned back to them. Help is coming, but we need to trust some people you might not expect. What kind of people? Sarah asked warily. The kind who understand that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the legal thing to do. Max had returned to Liam's side but remained alert, his training evident in the way he positioned himself to watch all possible entrances. How long do we have? Mark asked, looking out at the vehicles below. Not long, Mrs. Chen replied, but long enough if we're smart about this. She moved to a cabinet and began pulling out supplies, backpacks, water bottles, energy bars, and what looked like emergency cash. You've been preparing for something like this, Sarah realized. My husband always said that if you're not prepared to run, you're not prepared to tell the truth, Mrs. Chen repeated. Some stories are worth the risk. Liam looked up at his parents with those serious brown eyes. Max says we can't let the bad men win. Too many dogs and soldiers got hurt. Sarah knelt down to her son's level. Honey, this is very dangerous. People could get hurt. People are already getting hurt, Liam replied with wisdom beyond his years. Danny got hurt trying to stop it. Max got hurt. We have to help them. The sound of car doors slamming came from the street below. Their time was running out. Mrs. Chen handed Mark one of the backpacks. There's another way out through the roof. It connects to the building next door, which connects to the old subway maintenance tunnels. More tunnels? Sarah asked. This town has a lot of history, Mrs. Chen smiled, and a lot of people who believe in helping others when they need it most. Max moved to the door, whining softly. Footsteps could be heard on the library's main stairs. They're in the building, Mark whispered. Liam carefully placed the military box in his backpack, his small hands gentle but determined. Don't worry, Max. We're going to finish what Danny started. The dog looked at the boy with what could only be described as trust, then moved toward a ladder Mrs. Chen had revealed behind another false panel. This leads to the roof, she explained. From there, you follow the connected buildings until you reach the old subway entrance. What about you? Sarah asked. Mrs. Chen was already moving toward the main door. Someone needs to slow them down, and someone needs to let the right people know you're coming. Heavy footsteps were now audible in the library below, along with muffled voices giving orders. Go, Mrs. Chen urged them, and remember, trust Max. That dog has more courage and loyalty than most humans. Liam hugged Mrs. Chen quickly. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for helping him, she replied, gesturing toward Max. Some heroes have 4 legs. They climbed through the hidden panel onto a ladder that led to the roof. Max, despite his size and exhaustion, managed the climb with surprising agility. The rain had lessened, but the roof was slippery, requiring careful movement across the connected buildings. Behind them, they could hear voices in the apartment they'd just left, then Mrs. Chen's calm responses to increasingly urgent questions. She's buying us time, Mark said as they carefully made their way across the rooftops. She's risking everything for people she barely knows, Sarah added, her respect for the librarian growing with each step. Liam, with Max beside him, moved with confidence across the unfamiliar terrain. She's not doing it for us, he said. She's doing it because it's right. As they reached the old subway entrance Mrs. Chen had described, Sarah realized that their morning had taught them something profound about courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing what needed to be done despite the fear. And sometimes, courage came in the most unexpected forms. A 5-year-old boy who listened to his heart, a loyal dog who kept an impossible promise, and ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things when it mattered most. The subway tunnels stretched ahead of them, dark and uncertain. But they were no longer running blindly. They had a purpose, evidence that could save lives, and each other. Most importantly, they had Max, a living reminder that loyalty and courage could survive even the worst humanity had to offer. The subway tunnels were a maze of abandoned passages that hadn't seen trains in decades. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on tiled walls that were cracked but still intact. Their footsteps echoed in the enclosed space, mixing with the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional scurry of small creatures in the darkness. Max led the way with surprising confidence, his nose guiding them through intersections where multiple tunnels branched off in different directions. Liam stayed close to the dog, one small hand resting on Max's back as they navigated the underground labyrinth. "How does he know where he's going?" Mark asked, his voice hushed in the oppressive quiet of the tunnels. "Danny taught him," Liam replied simply. "They practiced escaping through places like this." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. They were planning for this. Danny knew they might have to run. The tunnel system seemed to stretch endlessly, but Max never hesitated at the various forks and junctions. His military training was evident in the way he moved, alert, purposeful, checking behind them periodically to ensure they weren't being followed. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they emerged through a maintenance exit that brought them to the outskirts of town, near the old mining district where abandoned buildings stood like silent sentinels against the gray sky. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, looking around at the desolate landscape. Max was already moving toward a cluster of buildings in the distance, his pace quickening despite his obvious exhaustion. There was something urgent in his movements now, something that made Liam break into a jog to keep up. "He knows this place," Liam said, breathing hard. "Something important is here." As they approached the buildings, Sarah could see that one of them had been recently disturbed. The ground around it was churned up, and there were tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones despite the rain. Max stopped at the edge of what appeared to be a shallow excavation site. His body language changed completely. The alert, protective posture melted away, replaced by something heartbreaking. He began to whine, a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from his very soul. "Oh no," Liam whispered, understanding immediately what Max had found. In the disturbed earth was a makeshift grave, recently dug and recently filled. A small wooden cross had been placed at one end, and on it, carved in rough letters, was a single name, Danny. Max lay down next to the grave, his massive body stretched along its length. The sounds he made were no longer whines, but something deeper, a keening cry of grief that echoed off the abandoned buildings and seemed to pierce straight through to their hearts. "His friend is here," Liam said, tears streaming down his face. "Max has been looking for him." Sarah knelt down beside Liam, putting her arms around her son, as they both watched the loyal dog's heartbreaking display of mourning. Mark stood behind them, his own eyes wet, as he witnessed the depth of the bond between soldier and dog. "They killed him," Mark said quietly, his lawyer's mind processing the implications, "and they buried him out here where no one would find him." Max's cries continued, a sound so filled with loss and love that it seemed to carry all the pain of separation, all the faithfulness of waiting, all the grief of final understanding. This was why he had waited by the train tracks. This was why he had guarded the evidence so fiercely. He had been keeping his promise to a friend who would never come home. Liam approached the dog carefully, his small hand reaching out to stroke Max's head. "It's okay, Max. You found him. You kept your promise." The dog looked up at Liam, and in his eyes was a mixture of gratitude and devastating sadness. He had completed his mission, but the cost had been everything. "We have to finish what Danny started," Liam said, his voice steady despite his tears. "We have to make sure the bad men can't hurt any more dogs or soldiers." Max placed his head on the grave one more time, then slowly rose to his feet. There was something different about him now, not broken, but transformed. The waiting was over. The searching was done. Now there was only the work that remained. Sarah noticed movement in the distance, vehicles approaching along the dirt road that led to the mining district. "We need to go," she said urgently. But Max wasn't ready to leave. He began digging near the head of the grave, his powerful paws working frantically at the soft earth. "What's he doing?" Mark asked. Liam knelt beside the dog, trying to understand. "He's looking for something Danny hid here." Within moments, Max had uncovered a small waterproof container buried just beneath the surface. Inside was another USB drive and a folded piece of paper. Mark read the paper quickly. "It's a map. Shows the location of the main facility where the experiments took place. And," his face went pale, "there are dates here. They're planning to move the operation tonight. Move it where? Sarah asked. Overseas, to a private military contractor in Eastern Europe. If they succeed, this evidence becomes worthless. No jurisdiction, no oversight, no way to stop them. The vehicles were getting closer now. 3 black SUVs moving fast along the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust despite the damp conditions. Max grabbed the container in his mouth and began running toward a cluster of rocks near the base of a small hill. There, hidden among the boulders, was the entrance to what appeared to be an old mining tunnel. More tunnels, Sarah said, but there was no frustration in her voice now. She was beginning to understand that these underground passages had been Danny and Max's lifeline, their insurance policy against the very situation they now found themselves in. The tunnel was different from the subway passages, rougher, older, carved from rock rather than built with concrete and tile, but it was dry and seemed to extend deep into the hillside. As they moved through the tunnel, following Max's lead once again, Liam suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked. They all listened. From somewhere ahead came the sound of voices, not their pursuers, but people talking in normal conversational tones. Max's ears perked up, and his tail wagged once. These were friendly voices. The tunnel opened into a large natural cavern that had been converted into what looked like a command center. Computer equipment lined one wall, powered by a generator that hummed quietly in the corner. Maps and photographs covered another wall, connected by strings that showed relationships and patterns. 3 people looked up as they entered, 2 men and a woman, all wearing civilian clothes, but moving with military precision. "Max!" one of the men exclaimed, and the dog rushed to him, tail wagging for the first time since they'd found Danny's grave. "Sergeant Rodriguez," the man said, introducing himself to Mark and Sarah. "I worked with Danny. We've been waiting for Max to lead someone here." "You knew we were coming?" Sarah asked. The woman, who introduced herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez, nodded. "We've been monitoring radio chatter. Mrs. Chen got word to us that you had made contact with Max and recovered the evidence." "Mrs. Chen is part of this?" Mark asked. "There are more of us than you might think," the third man, Captain James Wright, explained. "Soldiers who refuse to stay quiet, civilians who believe in doing what's right, people who understand that some things are worth fighting for." Dr. Vasquez was examining Max, checking his condition with practiced hands. "He's malnourished and exhausted, but otherwise healthy. Remarkable, considering what he's been through." "What exactly has he been through?" Sarah asked. Sergeant Rodriguez's expression darkened. Max was one of the first dogs in the program. They tested experimental drugs on him, subjected him to psychological conditioning designed to eliminate empathy and increase aggression. But Max was stronger than they expected. He never lost his ability to bond with humans. "That's why Danny was able to save him," Captain Wright added. "Most of the other dogs in the program became different, dangerous, but Max retained his humanity, if you can call it that." Liam was sitting beside Max, both of them seeming to understand more than the adults around them. "Max remembers the bad place," Liam said quietly. "He doesn't want other dogs to go through what he did." Dr. Vasquez knelt down beside Liam. "That's exactly right. And that's why this evidence is so important. We can stop them from creating more facilities, from hurting more animals and people. But we need to act tonight," Sergeant Rodriguez said urgently. "According to our intelligence, they're moving the primary research to a facility in Moldova. Once it's there, it becomes untouchable." Mark pulled out the USB drives and documentation they had been carrying. "We have Danny's evidence, audio recordings, photographs, financial records. But how do we get it to someone who can act on it?" Captain Wright smiled grimly. "That's where you come in. Senator Williams is holding a closed session hearing tonight on military accountability. She's been trying to get evidence of this program for months." "But surely they're watching her," Sarah protested. "They are," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "But they're not watching you, a family with a young child. You're invisible to them in the right context." "What kind of context?" Mark asked, though Sarah suspected he already knew the answer. "Senator Williams is speaking at a public library fundraiser tonight," Sergeant Rodriguez explained. "High-profile event, lots of families, plenty of children. The perfect cover." Sarah looked at her son, who was now leaning against Max's side, both of them seeming to draw strength from each other. "You want us to approach a United States senator at a public event and hand her evidence of a military conspiracy?" "Yes," Captain Wright said simply. That's insane, Mark protested. It's the only way, Dr. Vasquez replied, and Max will be with you. Max? Sarah asked. But won't that make us more conspicuous? Sergeant Rodriguez smiled. Have you ever seen how people react to a well-trained dog at a community event? They see the dog, not the people with him, and Max knows how to blend in when he needs to. Liam looked up at his parents. Max wants to finish his mission. He wants to make sure Danny didn't die for nothing. The dog looked at Liam, then at Sarah and Mark, and in his eyes was a quiet plea. He had carried this burden alone for so long. Now he needed their help to see it through. What about the men who are chasing us? Sarah asked. We'll handle them, Captain Wright assured her. They're focused on finding Max and the evidence. They won't expect you to walk into a public event. Dr. Vasquez handed Sarah a small device. This is a secure radio. If anything goes wrong, press the red button. Help will come. And if everything goes right, Mark asked. Then a lot of good soldiers and innocent animals get justice, Sergeant Rodriguez replied, and a little boy and his dog become heroes. The sound of vehicles outside made them all freeze, but instead of alarm, the three soldiers showed satisfaction. Right on time, Captain Wright said, checking his watch. The diversion is working. Through a crack in the cavern entrance, they could see the black SUVs racing past, following false trails and decoy signals that led away from their hiding place. You have 2 hours to get ready, Dr. Vasquez said. The fundraiser starts at 7. Sarah looked at her family, her brave son, her determined husband, and now Max, who had somehow become part of them in the span of a single day. They had started the morning as ordinary people living ordinary lives. Now they were carrying the hopes of fallen soldiers, the dreams of justice, and the future of countless innocent animals who deserved better than to be victims of human cruelty. We'll do it, she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Max's tail thumped once against the cavern floor. For the first time since they had found him, he looked hopeful. The mission that had started with Danny and Max was about to be completed by a family who had stumbled into heroism simply by listening to a child's inexplicable certainty that someone needed help. And sometimes, Sarah realized, that's exactly how the most important battles are won, not by soldiers or politicians or people with power, but by ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when the moment demands it. The Pine Haven Public Library had been transformed for the evening's fundraiser. Warm lights hung from the ceiling, children's artwork decorated the walls, and families mingled throughout the main hall, creating the perfect atmosphere for what should have been a peaceful community event. Sarah adjusted Liam's collar nervously as they approached the library entrance. Max walked beside them, wearing a simple blue collar that Dr. Vasquez had provided, looking every bit like a beloved family pet, rather than a highly trained military dog carrying the weight of a dangerous secret. Remember, Mark whispered, we're just a family attending a community event with our dog. Our dog who happens to be evidence in a military conspiracy, Sarah murmured back, trying to keep her voice light despite her racing heart. Liam looked up at them with those serious brown eyes. Max says it's going to be okay. Senator Williams is a good person. How does he know that? Mark asked, then immediately shook his head. Never mind. I'm starting to accept that some things don't need explanations. As they entered the library, Sarah was struck by how normal everything seemed. Parents chatted while children ran between the stacks. Volunteers served cookies and lemonade, and a small stage had been set up near the reference section where Senator Williams would speak. Max drew immediate attention, as Sergeant Rodriguez had predicted. Children gravitated toward him, and adults smiled warmly at the well-behaved dog who seemed so comfortable around people. What a beautiful German shepherd, an elderly woman commented, reaching out to pet Max. Is he a rescue? Yes, Liam answered before his parents could speak. We saved him today. The woman beamed. How wonderful! There's nothing like giving a deserving animal a loving home. If only she knew, Sarah thought, watching Max accept the attention with patient grace, while never losing his alert awareness of their surroundings. Senator Williams was easy to spot when she arrived, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes, surrounded by a small security detail that tried to remain inconspicuous. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to chat with families and thank the volunteers. She's here, Mark said quietly. How do we approach her? Sarah asked. We can't just walk up and say we have evidence of a military conspiracy. Liam was watching Senator Williams interact with other children. She likes kids and dogs, he observed. That's good. Max seemed to understand the situation instinctively. As Senator Williams moved closer to their section of the library, he positioned himself so that his presence would naturally draw her attention. The plan worked perfectly. Senator Williams noticed Max immediately, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "What a magnificent dog," she said, approaching them. "May I pet him?" "Of course," Sarah replied, her heart hammering as the senator knelt down to Max's level. Max, displaying the perfect manners that were part of his training, sat calmly and allowed Senator Williams to stroke his head. But then he did something unexpected. He gently took the senator's hand in his mouth and guided it to the collar, where Dr. Vasquez had hidden a small USB drive. Senator Williams paused, her fingers finding the device. Her expression changed subtly, becoming more alert. "Interesting collar," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach Sarah and Mark, but no one else. "It belonged to his previous owner," Liam said with the perfect innocence only a child could manage. "A soldier named Danny. Max misses him very much." Sarah saw recognition flicker in Senator Williams's eyes. The name Danny Morrison was clearly familiar to her. "I see," the senator said carefully. "And how did Max come to be with your family?" "We found him this morning," Mark replied, playing his part. "He was waiting by some old train tracks. He seemed to be guarding something important." Senator Williams continued to pet Max, but her attention was now completely focused on their conversation. "Guarding something?" "Pictures and sounds that show bad men doing bad things," Liam said, his child's vocabulary making the deadly serious information sound like something from a storybook. The senator's hand stilled on Max's fur. "That sounds very serious." "Max's friend Danny wanted someone good to hear the sounds," Liam continued. "Someone who could stop the bad men from hurting more dogs and soldiers." Senator Williams looked directly at Sarah and Mark. "I think I'd like to hear more about this. Perhaps we could speak privately?" Before they could respond, Sarah noticed a commotion near the library entrance. General Harrison Beck had arrived, flanked by military aides and moving with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to having doors open for him. Max's entire demeanor changed instantly. His body went rigid, a low growl rumbling from his chest. The sound was barely audible, but Senator Williams felt it through her hands. "I take it Max doesn't care for the general," she said quietly. "Max has very good judgment about people," Mark replied. General Beck was scanning the crowd, his eyes moving systematically through the room. When his gaze fell on their group, specifically on Max, his expression hardened. "Senator Williams," he called out, approaching with false joviality, "wonderful to see you supporting community literacy." "General Beck," the senator replied, rising but keeping one hand on Max's head, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Always happy to support local causes," Beck said, his eyes never leaving Max. "Interesting dog, looks like military breeding." "He's a rescue," Sarah said quickly. Beck's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Really? He looks familiar. We've had some dogs go missing from our training programs recently. Terrible thing, really. These animals can be dangerous when they're not properly handled." Max's growl became more pronounced, and Liam moved closer to the dog's side. "He doesn't seem dangerous to me," Senator Williams observed. "Quite well behaved, actually." "Military working dogs are trained for specific purposes, Senator," Beck said, his tone carrying an edge of warning. "They can be unpredictable around civilians. Perhaps it would be better if this family found a more suitable pet." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah felt her protective instincts flare. "Max is perfectly fine with us," she said firmly. Beck's attention shifted to her, and Sarah saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. "I'm sure he is, but these animals have training that can resurface unexpectedly. It would be unfortunate if someone got hurt," Liam spoke up, his young voice carrying clearly through the tension. "Max would never hurt good people. He only protects them from bad people." The silence that followed was electric. Beck's facade of friendliness dropped completely. "Interesting perspective from such a young child," he said. "Children often have vivid imaginations about good and bad, don't they?" "Sometimes children see things more clearly than adults," Senator Williams said, her voice steady but her hand tightening protectively on Max's collar. Beck was about to respond when the sound of sirens began in the distance. His expression shifted to one of concern, then anger as he spoke quietly into a radio he pulled from his jacket. Whatever he heard made his face go pale. "Senator, I'm afraid I need to leave," he said abruptly. "Urgent military business. But I do hope you'll consider what I said about that dog. Some things are best left to the professionals." As Beck strode toward the exit, his aides scrambling to keep up, Senator Williams turned back to the family. "I think," she said quietly, "that we definitely need to have that private conversation. Now." She led them to a small conference room behind the main desk, closing the door behind them. The moment they were alone, her entire demeanor changed from politician to prosecutor. "How much do you know about what you're carrying?" she asked directly. Mark pulled out the main USB drive from the military box. "Enough to know that people have died for this information." Senator Williams took the drive, her expression grim. "Danny Morrison was one of the best soldiers I ever met. When he disappeared, I knew it wasn't voluntary." "You knew Danny?" Sarah asked. "He came to me 6 months ago with initial concerns about the experimental program. I told him to gather evidence, that I'd protect him if he could bring me proof." Her voice caught slightly. "I failed him." "No," Liam said firmly. "You didn't fail. Danny knew you would help. That's why Max waited so long to find us. He was waiting for the right people to bring the truth to you." Senator Williams looked at Liam with newfound respect. "You're quite wise for someone so young." "Max teaches me things," Liam replied simply. The senator plugged the USB drive into her laptop, and her face grew increasingly grave as she reviewed the contents. "This is worse than I suspected. The scope of the corruption, the number of people involved." She looked up at them. "You realize how dangerous this makes you?" "We realized that this morning, when they started chasing us," Mark replied. "General Beck won't give up easily," the senator warned. "He has resources, connections, people who owe him favors." Max had been lying quietly beside Liam, but now he rose and moved to the window. His body language indicated alert attention, not alarm. "What is it, boy?" Liam asked. Through the window, they could see police cars surrounding the library, but these weren't the black SUVs that had been pursuing them. These were local police, and they were arresting several men in dark clothing who had been positioned around the building. "Captain Wright's people," Sarah realized. "They're cleaning up Beck's surveillance team." Senator Williams smiled, the first genuine smile they'd seen from her all evening. "It seems your new friends are quite efficient." "What happens now?" Mark asked. The senator was already making phone calls, her voice crisp and professional as she spoke to what sounded like federal investigators and military command. Max had returned to Liam's side, his mission finally, truly complete. "Now," Senator Williams said, ending her calls, "we finish what Danny started. By tomorrow morning, General Beck and his associates will be under federal investigation. The facilities will be raided, the experiments shut down, and the surviving animals will be rehabilitated." "And Max?" Liam asked, the most important question of all. Senator Williams knelt down to the dog's level, much as she had when they first met. "Max is a hero. He's earned the right to choose his own future." Max looked at Liam, then at Sarah and Mark. His choice was clear. "I think," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "Max has already chosen his new family." 6 months later, Sarah stood in their backyard watching Liam and Max play fetch in the golden afternoon sunlight. The German shepherd had filled out, his coat glossy and his eyes bright with contentment. The trauma was still there, probably always would be, but it had been tempered by love, security, and purpose. The trials had concluded just last week. General Beck and 17 of his associates had been convicted on charges ranging from animal cruelty to conspiracy to commit murder. The experimental facilities had been shut down, and the surviving animals were being rehabilitated at sanctuaries across the country. Danny Morrison had been given a hero's burial at Arlington National Cemetery, with Max lying beside his grave as an honor guard played taps. Senator Williams had presented the family with a citation for civic courage, though they all agreed the real hero was the dog who had kept his promise against impossible odds. "Dinner's ready," Mark called from the back porch, and Max immediately abandoned the tennis ball to trot toward the house, Liam running alongside him. As they gathered around the table that night, Sarah looked at her family, expanded now to include a four-legged member who had taught them all about loyalty, courage, and the power of never giving up on the people you love. "Max says thank you," Liam announced, as he did every night. "Thank you for what?" Sarah asked, playing her part in their nightly ritual. "For giving him a new family to protect," Liam replied, and for helping him keep his promise to Danny. Max's tail thumped against the floor, and Sarah could swear she saw contentment in his dark eyes. He had waited by those train tracks for someone to come back. But what he discovered was that sometimes the most beautiful thing about love is that it finds new ways to grow, even in the darkest circumstances. The dog who had been trained to be a weapon had chosen instead to be a guardian. The family who had started their day as ordinary people had learned they were capable of extraordinary courage. And somewhere in the space between heartbreak and hope, they had all found something precious, proof that loyalty rewarded, love recognized, and promises kept can change the world, one brave choice at a time. Like and share if this story touched your heart, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Stories like Max's remind us that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to walk away when someone needs help.